stand and I'll recognize you and sing it out. We have a microphone up here in front, but we can probably make ourselves heard without that. If there's no first question, we'll go to the second one. Yes, ma'am?
I'd like to know why did Jews get out of there when things started getting so bad? I do know some that did get out.
Why didn't the Jews get out when it started getting bad?
Because there was no place to go. Because Palestine, as it was called then, was controlled by Great Britain. And in 1939 May, they said only 15,000 Jews will be allowed to come to Palestine any year. We here in the United States since 1925 or thereabouts had laws called immigration laws, which limited the number of people from any country of Europe that were allowed to come to the United States. It's based on a 1900 census, very, very complicated formula. As I pointed out at dinner, at one point, and I'm very proud of the state of New York. Why? Because the senator from New York, the name of Robert Wagner Sr., proposed that 20,000 Jewish children be allowed to come to the United States outside of the quota. That particular legislation died in committee. And so there was no place to go. There are a few places in the world which was possible, but very few could get there. In fact, my parents and grandparents all applied to come to the United States in 1939. We had all the papers, the birth certificates, and none of us had TB, and none of us were crippled, because those are the limits to. And had somebody in the United States guarantee that should my father and mother not be able to get a job or open up a business, we will not be part of the welfare system, that they'll support us, all that. And we got a number, a registration number in Prague. And we were told everything's in order. So I said, can we go? Small detail, there is a line. 6 years before our number is called.
Another question. Yes, sir.
Given the areas in the Middle East where sort of turmoil has resumed in a big way, what similarity do you see with the Christians being eliminated in places, and just wondered what your thoughts on that?
What about the persecution of Christians in the stormy Middle East today?
It's going on in a big way. Not just persecution, murder! And that's okay. It seems that's okay. The Coptic Christians being murdered, churches being burned down. The Christian population of the Middle East is zooming down. The only place it's increasing is in Israel.
Amen.
In fact, I had the privilege and pleasure to go around and speak to a couple of universities with the Greek Orthodox priest from Nazareth, telling people in America, Christians, wake up, help us, support Israel. And he's going around, one of the special functions he has is to convince young Christians in Israel to join the army, he says, because no one else is protecting us. I haven't heard that much out of Rome about this problem. I don't understand why.
Another one? Brandon.
Thank you very much. I'm sure on everyone's mind is the agreement to all but hand Iran a nuclear weapon. I'd be very interested to hear your comments on that, and perhaps looking back at the last time the West betrayed the Jews with a treaty signed in Munich.
Nuclear weapons for Iran.
There is some relationship between Iran and Germany. In fact, Nazism and fundamental Islam have one difference. Everybody can become a Muslim. Not everybody could become a Nazi. And that's where the differences end. Their objective, I believe, is very simple. To recreate the Persian Empire. To control that part of the world. And eventually all of Europe. Because as it was said recently by one of the mullahs, any piece of land that was ever under the control of Islam must come back to Islam. In case you don't remember, you're not as old as I am, Islam used to be at the gates of Vienna. It used to be on the Buddha side of Budapest. That's the objective, my friends. And everything is okay. Murder is a perfectly reasonable political tool. And we have a piece of paper which says Iran will never build a nuclear bomb. You remember Chamberlain? We may have a new one. Someone who exceeds Chamberlain's naivete.
Amen.
That's what scares the living daylights out of
Professor Cotter.
When you were, thank you first of all for coming. And when you were at the work camp Buchenwald, we hear about the inhumanity of the guards. Did you ever see hesitation or humanity in those who were there?
Let me tell you an event in Auschwitz. I worked with horses, and most of the time I plowed the fields. But on occasion I would be pulled out. In the morning I would get another order. I would have to get a horse and wagon, depending what I was going to do, and go someplace. One morning I'm told I'm not going to the field. I have to get a huge wagon and go and get straw. Well, I knew where I'm going, but it was outside of the camp area. Therefore, I did not go alone. I went with a guard. And the guard gets on, and he's a German soldier, and doesn't say much, and we're driving along. And then we pass by about maybe 500 yards from the gas chambers in Auschwitz too. He says, "What's the factory doing there?" So mind you, I'm 15 years old, I'm a wise guy kid. He says, "You're pulling my leg. This is where they bring Jews, and most of them are murdered upon arrival." He says, "Nah, don't be ridiculous. Fighting war, we need manpower." I said, "Look, do yourself a favor." He got there the night before. He was wounded on the Russian front, and this is R&R, rest and rehabilitation. You get easy duty, nobody shooting at you. He doesn't believe me. So I said, "Okay." That night, evidently, he went back to his lodging and asked people, his buddies, and they told him. Next morning, I'm told my job is to get a small wagon, hitch my team of horses to it, and go and pick up a motor, a huge electric motor at the railroad station of Centennial. So, I need a guard, same guard. Doesn't say anything. He sits beside me in my wagon, and we're about maybe half hour out of the camp. He turns to me and puts his hand into his pocket and gives me a bunch of candy. I suppose he realized that I was not some kind of a criminal. I was a 15-year-old kid. A month later, I saw him again. He was marching with a group, screaming and yelling at them because they were digging the ditch too slowly. Environment tends to subsume us.
What else? Ron.
I assume that when you were all rounded up, that you weren't armed. Can you tell me how and when you were disarmed?
We were never armed. That was not a thing that Europeans by and large did. If we would have had an arm, any arms at all, I suspect they would have been taken away from us. But that was not the common thing to have guns or rifles. That was not a very common thing. And let's understand that there were Jews who revolted, who took arms. Now there was a ghetto called the Warsaw Ghetto. and some others. In 1942, the Warsaw Ghetto was being dismantled, basically, just gotten rid of. They took the first 20 or 30,000 Jews and took them to a place called Treblinka, which was a death camp. And one or two people managed to somehow come back and tell the people in the ghetto, when you get into the train, you're not going to be resettled. You're going to be murdered. And so, at one point, in the spring of 1943, a bunch of guards, fully armed, are coming to the ghetto to get more Jews. Another transport of maybe 10,000 Jews. The young people in the ghetto decided that that's not going to happen. Months earlier, they began to try and get weapons. They learned how to make Molotov cocktails. They even managed to get a machine gun. And when this group of Germans came in, they began to fire at them and throw Molotov cocktails. They retreated. And nothing happened for a while. And then another group of Germans came in with tanks. And they began firing larger weapons. And they continued to fight. And then came in with more weapons and flamethrowers, and going from house to house and burn each house down. And you were inside the house, you burned to death. It took 4 weeks for the Nazis or the Germans to totally and completely annihilate the ghetto and murder every person in there. A few managed to escape through the sewer system. Let's understand. You weren't fighting a bunch of soldiers. Not even with arms. You're fighting the Nazi Reich. They were fighting a war against the Jews. There were two wars going on, my friends. They were against the Allies and the Jews. It took us, America, since 1941 to 1945, defeat the German army. They were so well armed. It's part of the war. They absolutely were determined to get rid of all the Jews. You're fighting a war. One of the most important things in war is getting arms and food and everything you need to the front line. How do you do that? By train. By cars. By railroad cars. They took thousands of railroad cars out of service, which they needed, logically, for the war effort. It was a war against the Jews. So all the guns, all the rifles, did nothing, eventually. Because they began the manufacturing and putting together an absolutely the most spectacular army in 1933. By the way, they weren't supposed to do that. They were not allowed to build submarines by contract with the Allies in Marseille and Versailles. Did anybody stop them? Did we know it? Hell yes. Not only that, my friends. There's a company which is located in Detroit. You may have heard of them, called Ford Motor Company. They had a major facility in Germany which produced lightweight Panzers for the Third Reich through the whole war. Business is business, my friends. Let's not get mixed up here. So it was a major war.
Irving, what was your late brother's name?
What's that?
What was your brother's name?
Bondi.
The book is Bondi's Brother. He would be, I'm sure, glad to sign it for you, shake your hand. It's $15. You never spend your money better to help this night be indelible in our memories. exit by the door on your right to walk past the book table after we adjourn, and we're not adjourning yet. If you exit by the door on your left, you're not going to be in the swim of things near the book table. I'm going to ask, we're going to have to adjourn, I'm sorry, ma'am.
Okay.
I'm going to ask
Come by.
everyone to stand, and I would like us to stand in silent respect, without a word, without a hand clap. Joe Maroney would escort Irving Roth out to the book table, and you can read him out there for as long as time permits and while the books last. I remind you, join us Thursday if you can, the 29th for Ben Carson. Join us the 5th of November for Hugh Hewitt, and the 7th of December for Dick Cheney. We're closing now in silence as Joseph Maroney escorts our honored guest, this eyewitness, this hero, out to the book table. I just have this thought, Irving. You mentioned that Bondi told you when it was worst to go to the spiritual, to go to the Psalms. I remember a Jew who went to the Psalms in his despair. He cried out from the 22nd Psalm, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" Which was not giving up, but it was a prayer, and it was a prayer that was answered for him. His Jewish mother and foster father called him Yeshua, Jesus. The world calls him Christ. And the Christians and the Jews come back together in Christians United for Israel in the noble cause represented by our guest tonight, our hero, our example, Irving Roth. In silence now as Joe escorts him out, please. Now your thunderous applause for Irving Roth, and we are...